This is Willpower.
We are recording and we're live. And I'm here with Lindsay from BirthFit, the Willpower podcast. And I just feel so fortunate to actually get some recorded time with you so that I can share the brilliance I've heard come out of your mouth in the past with the world, as it were. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. And like I said, I told Kristen this in a text or something, but usually I'm not a pain in the butt. So I appreciate your adaptability and rescheduling and embracing mom life with me.
Yeah, so amazing. I think what's so pivotal, or just for me, is exciting when I talk to people about your business a lot and about BirthFit specifically and what the work you've done and just like some support tools, and knowing Emily, who you trained in so many ways. And I just think it's amazing. And I kind of want to open because you have a baby, not newborn, but close. You have a new baby.
She's 1 year now.
Yeah. And it's like, how did that feel to be so knowledgeable and then be like, oh my goodness, I know all of these things, but now I'm really like embodying this process.
Yeah. It's okay. So it's been a wild, messy, beautiful experience. And like I was sharing earlier, I feel so honored to be a mother. And I was just having this conversation with our coach group earlier that our society kind of like gives motherhood a bad rap. Like it's supposed to be depressing or not fun or not fulfilling, or we give up things. And that's really taking us down the victim mentality, like spiral. And we're like on a mission to change that. Like we get to be mothers. These little spirits chose us, and what a cool opportunity that is. So yeah, I feel extremely blessed. Even when it's like middle of the night, baby's girl gets her first tooth and she can't sleep. I'm like, I get to do this. Sometimes you got to say that out loud, but like this is all of it's temporary, everything. And somebody shared this with me, like way before Vera came, was like, the beautiful and heartbreaking thing about motherhood is that nothing lasts forever. It's all temporary. And I was like, oh my God, that gets me in the heartstrings. Yeah. But to answer your question, I got pregnant at 40 and had my baby at 40, and it was awesome. And it was all natural. And 2 years prior, we had a miscarriage, or I had the miscarriage. And I literally just from that moment on dug deep, cultivated within the 7 pillars that we have. And for those listening, it's sun, like sunshine, sleep, mindset, fitness, community, and spirituality. And I'm missing one.
There's the 7 pillars of BirthFit.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just write them down so I know. Mindfulness. Let's start again. Sorry.
There's the sun, so sunshine, circadian rhythm. There's sleep, which is uber important. There is mindset practices, fitness, and then there is mindset, fitness, nutrition, community, and spirituality. That is 7. I can't count. So I was, just focusing on optimizing my health, my biology, through those simple things. And lo and behold, the week after I turned 40, took a pregnancy test because I missed my period. And I was like, oh, there we go. I knew it deep down. I was like, oh, hey. So my whole pregnancy, I made the choice to just go deep within myself, set up some boundaries, block out negative talk, negative energy, and really just focus on, I want to say, like the mindset piece of it. Because as you know, I've studied for a decade. I've been a part of women's health for over a decade. And I didn't want to read like any trauma stories. I didn't want to read any what ifs. Like I've already read all that. I knew the stats, I knew the numbers. I knew the what ifs. And I really just wanted to like level up my mental game, my vibe, everything. And that's what I did in pregnancy. And, I think it worked,
I think it worked. She came out okay.
She came out. I gave birth on our back porch. It was awesome. Just as close to nature as God designed. No pokies, no ointments, nothing. We left her cord, let it pulsate for as long as it did. And we just really bathed in the natural experience that it could be. And I'm so grateful for that experience.
And I want to unpack a couple. Number one, I want to honor the fact that you've been through what you went through, because I have friends who have miscarried and have worked so hard to get pregnant, and finally in the long run ended up with IVF and all the things. And it is a, it's a loss. It's a major loss in the family either way. So I think that there's an opportunity to, people are taking the opportunity to grieve through that process and just how it may change you as a human. And I also think in some ways, perhaps how it gives you some guidance or ability to give people guidance who are, again, you're coaching and you're working with, and in these realms around, whether it be fertility or inception or, pregnancy. And the other thing I just want to honor that, because it's,
thank you.
Yeah. It feels like a deep spiritual thing.
It totally, I think it has the opportunity to be for women for sure.
Yeah.
And we took it as a beautiful learning experience. And like my body, my vessel served that spirit, and the length of, I felt like it was he in his journey, and it was complete. And I felt like it was healing. And also, you've got to honor that loss in some way. And so, we did on our terms, and then I'm going to say recovered, rebuilt, replenished, rejuvenated.
Yeah, for sure. And then the other thing to unpack is, I think there's some women, I work with so many female clients, and then many, many all types of human bodies, husbands and people who are creating new order in the way a family works. It's 4 parents and, 3 men and 1 woman and whatever the mix is. And it's so incredible to see that. And I think there are many, many people still who ask me the questions about, giving birth at home and complications, or in a tub or outside of the water, or like where you do it, and how part of the work that you're doing in the world, I think, is to normalize these things as well, to get some understanding of what happens in a medical facility. But what do you say to the women, or what would you say to women who I imagine come to you a lot, but even just if you hear people you overhear people speaking about, hey, this pregnancy thing, and I would love to do a home birth, but I feel like that's really intense or scary or dangerous, or because I know that mentality still exists. Someone's like, I don't know what I don't know, and I don't want something to go wrong. This isn't a life I'm bringing in the world. So how do you sort of walk people through that, like whether it's via your experience, or you said we just let the cord stay attached and pulsate as long as it pulsates, and I'm like, I get it. There's like still a connectivity of the fluid, and like, tell me more about all that, like that. That piece of it.
Oh my gosh, there's so many rabbit holes we could go down. For one, just my little tangent on the placenta. Like the placenta is baby's twin, and they're literally created, conceived at the same time. And placenta will be baby's guardian angel throughout the whole experience. And the placenta and the cord basically are that conduit between mom and baby. And baby is a hitchhiker on mom's nervous system throughout the whole experience. And so whenever mom sees, tastes, feels, touches, whatever her vibe is, that's being communicated through that cord, through that umbilical cord and the placenta. And it's much more than just a filtration gas exchange organ. It's super cool. There's a book called The Placenta, The Forgotten Chakra. And if you want to go down that rabbit hole some more. But that's all I'll say about that, because we could talk about the placenta.
For sure. But I love that. And the thing I just learned a couple years ago from someone who was teaching about physiology of breath, how there's almost like an instantaneous moment that as the baby is born, that the gas exchange completely can shift in the body, so that it's now then going from a sort of a deoxygenated, or using, all the placental and mother's stuff, right, to like being able to come out and take that first breath and then instantaneously be able to uptake oxygen. And that's just like, what a miracle.
It's a dang miracle. And
fascinating.
So to piggyback on that, whenever I was talking to Tom with Morosco, he was sharing about the theory of how we evolved from like amphibians, fish, and being born in water, which my daughter was. She just kind of like my husband's hands guided her into the water, and she didn't really need to breathe because she was still attached to the cord. And she just kind of floated there, and she looked up and you could see her big old eyes, still her big old eyes stare into your soul now. But it was like the most peaceful, beautiful thing. So I really cringe whenever the cord is cut early in the hospitals because you're taking away so much nutrient, oxygen rich blood from the baby.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes one way in the cord, to baby or not, mom doesn't get it back or benefit from it.
Yeah.
So
and it feels like prana. It feels like, that there's like some life force there. That's like those moments. It's a vibe.
Yeah.
It's a vibe. Yeah. Yeah.
It's full of vitality. It's powerful.
So cool.
So freaking cool. So check out that book if anybody wants to, the Placenta, the Forgotten Chakra. We just don't honor it in our society like some other cultures around the world. And many cultures will do things called a lotus birth or plant their placenta with a tree to honor the angel that it was, hang it from a tree, or, all these really cool traditional, I would say traditions from traditional tribes across the world. Just kind of dig in there. But
when my sister had her first child, I called her and was like, "Are you going to keep the placenta? What are you doing with the placenta?" And she was like, I don't know. And I was like, can I have it? Can we dry it and powder it? Can I have it if you're not going to use it? And I also asked to be in that. It's no slight on my sister. It was her first baby. Her husband was adopted. So it's like, it was a very big ritual. They wanted it to be just shared between the two of them.
Yeah.
Totally get it. And I was like, can I be in the room? Can I eat the placenta? I was like the overbearing sister, I think.
They're like, lady, chill out. No.
Yeah, they were like, okay.
One tip I had, if you're giving birth in the hospital, is to ask or put it in writing to take your placenta home, take the umbilical cord, take your placenta, because it is known that they will sell that on the black market, or somebody will. That thing is worth like $20,000. So take that.
They will sell it like for stem cells and stuff, things like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So make sure you're getting your parts back no matter what you do with them.
Yes. So to answer your question before about, if somebody's scared or hesitant about having a birth outside of the hospital system, we're almost dead last, not quite dead last like maternal, but almost dead last for infant mortality rate. And over 98% of births happen in the hospital. So those numbers aren't happening outside of the hospital. They're like, if 98% of the births happen in the hospital, then a lot of the negative things are happening inside of the walls of the hospital. Mm-hmm. We spend close to $100 billion on birth in our country. And I don't know if anybody's recently listened to the Tucker Carlson podcast with Callie and Casey. It was brilliant. I think it's Dr. Callie and her brother Casey. She's a doctor. She's a trained surgeon, and he's kind of a whistleblower that used to work for Coca-Cola, I believe. I love it. They're like tearing stuff up in the lobbying department, but they share a bunch of numbers on that podcast of how we as a society have never been sicker, and specifically our children. So when I talk to couples, I'm like, look, the critical period for us as human beings is from 3 months to 12 months prior to conception to that first year of life, that first year postpartum. And we are totally just introducing things that are, I would say, not necessary at all. For example, babies in the hospital automatically, unless you say otherwise, they get a Hep B injection and erythromycin on their eyes. It's an ointment on their eyes. There's no need for that. And babies are not IV drug users, nor have they had sexual intercourse. So there's no chance of, STDs. So the more the more we infringe, interrupt, disrupt that critical period, the more dis-ease or pathology will show up. And, I'm a big believer that God, nature, universal law, whatever you want to call it, has given us a blueprint and it's up to us to follow it.
Mhm.
And if we don't follow it, then dis-ease is going to show up. Pathology is going to show up. So I kind of share that. And then, it depends on how I'm working with them. Like in the past, if I was a doula or, had a more intimate role with the family, I would ask them 2 questions. And these are questions I asked myself. Me and my husband both answered together. And one is, where would you be if everything went as desired? Where would you want to give birth? And let them sit there, think about it. And then I say, where would you want to be if nothing went as desired? And for us, the answer was the same. And usually the answers are the same, because when people are not put in like a fear-based scenario where it's not like the pressure's cooking and they have to make a decision like 10 seconds from now, they will make decisions out of love instead of fear.
Mhm.
And so that's why we go through that before, so that, if birth never goes as planned, but that's the beauty of it. But when we surrender and adapt and we stay true to our values and we make choices out of love and not fear, then we end up on the other side with a really fulfilling experience. When we don't, we end up on the other side with a little bit of shame and regret and like, oh, I'm replaying that scenario in my head or, whatever. So those are kind of the two avenues I take: a little bit of education and then getting getting more intimate with a couple.
Yeah. That's really beautiful to give them some prompts in that way. Yeah. And when you, all of this conversation and also this, like the 7 pillars that you talked about: sun, sleep, mindset, fitness, nutrition, community, and spirituality. All of these things are part of this BirthFit model and part of the way that you work with people. And I'd love for you to just sort of briefly describe or share with people who may not be familiar with BirthFit what an incredible resource it is, but really just the sort of the mission of this company that you founded.
Yeah. So in short, BirthFit provides, we sell, that's our offer. That's our service out there: nervous system based general strength and conditioning programs. And wasn't anything out there whenever I started that was, I would say, easy, but simple, addressing just general strength and conditioning for the woman inside of her motherhood transition seasons. So that'd be preconception, pregnancy, and postpartum. There was no outline of how to return to general strength and conditioning fitness. Women are cleared for sex and exercise at 6 weeks postpartum. And that was basically based on the average woman and her uterus shrinking down to its previous size. Like that's it. It wasn't based on whether the tissue was healed or not healed, whether she could stand on one leg, do a squat with no pain, none of that.
And certainly nobody was giving prescriptive, like, hey, here's the exercises you can start with. Yep.
No. And if you think about it, for some of the professionals, like if a woman has a C-section, that C-section scar at 6 weeks is still pretty thick, like still needs some fascial work, abdominal massage. Like we don't need to be doing snatches and burpees at that time. So that it was like general strength and conditioning and rehab. And when I started, I was a doula, I was a coach at a CrossFit gym, strength and conditioning gym, and a chiropractor. And it was basically the intersection of all those worlds for me. And I was working at 2 different birth centers, one on the east side of LA, one on the west side. One was run by a nurse midwife, one was run by a professional midwife. So it was a little bit more medical and a little bit more hippy dippy, if you will. But even midwives, at the time had their, I want to say, misconceptions about training during pregnancy. And this is like back in 2013. So like the excuse some midwives would give women would be like, you were too fit. That's why the baby didn't descend. And it's like, when you say that out loud, does that actually make sense? Like, that's a cop-out answer, And that's what got me thinking it's more than fitness. When we train for birth, and I put it in quotations, train for birth, it's literally like an Olympian training for 4 years for the 100-meter sprint. They don't just train physical, they eat, sleep, breathe this. Some of them have a mindset coach. I guarantee Sydney McLaughlin had a mindset coach, had a nutrition coach, had hurdles coach, had a sprint coach, had all kinds of, resources in her back corner. So we train mind, body, and soul for birth and for that motherhood transition. And over the years of working with women, I realized, because, as work evolves, you've probably gone through this too. Like as you personally develop and evolve, your work evolves. And what I realized was I was never taught just simple practices to cultivate, enhance my own biology, my own reproductive biology. Grew up very standard American and standard American diet, school lunches, inhalers, steroids, things like that, Western medicine, you name it. And there was no wise woman in my family passing down knowledge or wisdom for me to honor my womb, honor my yoni, honor my cycle, to transition into being a woman, being a mother. And that's like the goal here at BirthFit, is to give women simple practices to honor their reproductive biology, to optimize their biology. And we started with movement. We started with fitness, because where else that's like the biggest, like you gain the most trust, the biggest shift happens when you're moving. And that basically imprints on your nervous system. Like if we go through, a sort of big experience, whether it be positive or negative, we got to move to like complete the experience. That completes the nervous system cycle. So when we show up every day for ourselves in the gym or in the garage gym or the studio or backyard or wherever, we're building trust within ourselves. So we start with movement, and that's how we kind of like, I don't want to say it's a gateway drug for us.
You sneak the gateway drug for you. And also how beautiful to talk about the nervous system in this way, where it's like also movement for the baby, also the cascade of bliss chemicals and the neurochemistry of the body and affecting the baby, and just setting yourself up for de-stressing if you're trying to get pregnant and you're in the midst of throes or IVF or all those things. It's like, this is the beautiful piece, is so much conversation around nervous system transfer to the child or to where you're at, right? You hear the stories all the time of people who try to get pregnant and then they can't and they adopt. And then 2 months later, she gets pregnant because they've relaxed.
Totally. That happens way more than you realize. And if you're going, like measuring your nervous system, right? Like HRV is the best way to kind of measure your nervous system right now, heart rate variability. And people have Garmin watches, Whoops, Oura rings, things like that. In the office, we used an Insight scanner. But all these 7 pillars, whether you're going for IVF or IUI, can be implemented as well. And when your nervous system is at a place ready for expansion, I guarantee that ART, assisted reproductive technology procedure, is going to be a lot more successful, than if your HRV was super low. So we try to get HRV higher, consistently higher. Nervous system's at a place ready to expand. Your nervous system range of motion will expand.
Yeah, so beautiful. And just understanding the tenet of how nervous system tone affects the baby as it comes out, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you see a person who's super chill, has a baby, and you're like, this baby is amazing. They're just chilling out. And it's like, no surprise there. And that's the correlation.
Yeah.
So cool. I want to weave a little bit in conversation around breath and cold, because I get so many questions, and you have such I watched you intermittently around your pregnancy doing cold plunging and checking in on that. And there's definitely people on the socials that are always like, oh my goodness, what are you doing? And you can't be in cold when you're pregnant, or you can, or there's a lot of discourse from the Chinese medicine community, which I had just finished recording a podcast with one of the master trainers in a traditional Chinese medicine person to talk about cold womb and the notions behind Chinese medicine, saying where and when cold may or may not be good, and how systemic cold is something that is sort of held in a different space, but that there's a lot of, there's like any good practice has existed for thousands of years. There's lots of different writings about it, right? So things get lost in translation and things get found in translation. And so we had a really nice conversation around that. But just understanding this landscape of pregnancy, and there's so many opinions in the mix. I just would love to get sort of your feedback, your understanding, some of the things that you continue to lean into and learn around let's talk about the cold exposure space first, because that's breath, I think, is something that's so beautiful. And I definitely want to talk about that. But let's talk about cold, because I know there'll be the hot topic of people saying, I want to hear what Lindsay has to say.
I usually share my experience, like my personal experience. And before that, if I was working with clients, I would say, remember, like in our mindset piece, we embrace radical responsibility. And that starts long before birth, as Dr. Tom shared. The case studies are so relevant. And I can't remember if it was him that I was talking to or somebody, but the N equals one thing is so real, like throughout pregnancy, postpartum, birth. Like if somebody tells you this exercise is safe, that it's kind of BS. Safe is relative. And, if somebody tells you this temperature is safe for a cold plunge or for a sauna or whatever, it's BS, because we're all different, and we all have different maps of the world. We all have different biochemistry. We all slept differently last night, ate different things this morning, whatever. So that said, I really would love to listen to that podcast with the acupuncturist.
Yeah, it comes out this week or next. But so when it does, I'll send you the link. Yeah, Carrie's great. And she's practical, because she's not no spoiler alert, but we talk about both sides of the aisle, right?
That's
because
cool.
This is a coming together versus another thing that you probably see, which is like a bunch of, I hate to say it tends to be women, because we're talking about cold and wombs. So but a lot of women in the community that are sort of in discourse, but not in a sweet, loving way.
Right.
I want us to have these conversations in sweet, loving ways that include and take into consideration our bio-individuality. And also our belief and our, this is what you're mentioning as well too, like belief, the structure of belief or your mindset. If someone's standing next to a cold plunge and they're like, this is the scariest thing I've ever done, their nervous system is different than me, where I'm standing next to it being like, when do we get to get in?
She's like excited. Yeah. So the Eastern medicine lens, which you probably went over with her, views pregnancy as a warm state. And I think that's pretty cool. Like that, the body is revved up. There's a lot going on. The blood is flowing. And I was pregnant during the wonderful hot days of summer here in Texas. Like my baby girl came August 27th last year. And I actually, believe it or not, took a screenshot of the temperature on our iPhones, where it says 10 days, and it was 101. So I totally embraced cold plunges. And at first, the noise got to me, because you hear people say, don't do cold plunges in pregnancy. But then I started going down rabbit holes on Instagram. Instagram's a dangerous place sometimes, or a beneficial place. And there are women, in cold countries, like freezing cold countries, jumping in the snow in pregnancy, every day, jumping in cold plunges. And then I started reading about how maybe it's Denmark, they push their babies outside to nap in the cold, or after birth to revive a baby, they dip a baby in ice cold water in Russia or different places. So it's like, our society has just gotten extremely comfortable. This is ridiculous. So I did cold plunges in my first trimester. I think I was a little bit fatigued. I napped more than anything towards the end of my first trimester. And then I started back up again. And for me, when I started back up again, I looked at the temperature of the surrounding rivers around us. And they're in the lower 60s, even like year round. Some are in the upper 50s. And that's what I started with. And I started just like going up to my hips, then over my belly. And then as I got more comfortable, just dumped, got in, got out, whatever. Some days I would do the espresso shots. But it was mainly what I felt comfortable with. And I think that's a big, big key and a huge benefit of me practicing BirthFit and the pillars is that I trusted my intuition and my gut feeling, and I didn't listen to any noise, only for a hot second. But I think it's good practice doing hard things like that. And the biggest thing I hear about the cold is that cold wombs, like you were saying, like you don't want to make your womb any colder. That if your adrenals are already shot, you don't want to jeopardize your thyroid health anymore. But cold plunge, getting cold, embracing the difficulty of a cold plunge. Yes, it's mental for sure, but it's also going to be one of the most metabolically supportive things you can do. And I definitely did that preconception. I didn't do it every day. Like I think some people do it every day, but I probably did it 3 times a week. And as somebody that was, late 30s, they would consider geriatric, 40. I could have very easily been on thyroid medication due to a sluggish metabolism or whatever. But I didn't really listen to that noise. I did the natural things like cold plunge, and let's say TSH is one of the things they look at. It was great. It was fine. Like there was no need for Western medicine support. And I think that's the biggest thing I hear is around preconception. They didn't have the experience they wanted, and they're almost taking it out on somebody else, which is unfortunate. But with pregnancy, I would do cold plunge at least once or twice a week. And it's interesting. So I ended up having my baby girl at 36 weeks, which would be considered early. My water started leaking at 36 weeks. And for those that don't know, women go into labor within 2 to 4 days. Like 85% of women will have their baby within 4 days of their water leaking. It's no need to freak out. Just don't have any vaginal exams because then your risk of infection goes up. And one of the things that I think this is like, it's not too much research out there, but I was trying to look for research for preterm labor. And one of it was heat or, getting too hot. And I was like, I really didn't ever feel hot in Texas because I think I used the cold plunge to support my body, my thermal regulation, my overall body temperature.
Yeah.
So it was interesting. After pregnancy, I'll share my spit on my thing on this is that I waited about 3 months because we were going into the colder months, and in Eastern medicine, she probably discussed this, like postpartum is considered a cold state. And so I listened to that a little bit. I tried to keep my womb and everything as warm as possible through nourishing foods and wraps and things like that. And then I started getting in cold plunge little by little. After talking with Dr. Tom, and this is kind of brilliant, I think we both, as we started talking out loud, like, why not use cold plunge if somebody starts to develop a little postpartum depression or anxiety?
Yeah, for sure.
Before going on SSRIs, because that's like free medicine.
Because we know that the neurochemistry shifts.
Yes.
We know that can help. And I want to say to everyone who's listening too, when we're talking about these things, like it's beautiful that you were like, what's the river temperature? Let me match the water. We see so often, I hate to call this like bro culture, but where it's like bro culture, athlete culture being like, it was 32 degrees. It was almost a frozen block of ice. And I was there for 20 minutes. And I was like, I couldn't even feel my penis, like whatever.
Yeah.
And it's really like, okay, that's cool in some context. And also in this one, it's like when I spoke to Dr. Stacy Sims and she's like, hey, I put women at 55 and you want to like yell and hoot and holler about 38 or 40 or whatever. Sure, you can do all ranges, but like there's always a place you can start that's a little bit warmer, and nobody's saying you have to stay in for too many minutes.
Relative.
It's totally relative. And so I just want to like highlight that to people, that there's so many different ways that you can start that don't have to be this all in competition style.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think like we mentioned like postpartum anxiety and depression. And I think if there was any complications in pregnancy, let's say preeclampsia, a plunge too, a cool plunge, whatever, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But it's such a brilliant tool that, like Western medicine's not going to make any money off of. So why would they promote it?
Yeah.
But I do think there's so much benefit in the cold therapy that we haven't even tapped into. And we were talking also about like how I shared, reviving a baby, dipping baby in cold. And gosh, I forgot the researcher or the president or somebody who shared, but think about it. Like if we sleep and we want to go have the best night's sleep ever, we set up a cool, dark room, so we can like snuggle all up. That makes the most sense, to like have a little baby being all bundled up to have the best nap ever. But my girl likes to sleep on me sometimes still, but have us bundled up,
Yeah, it's like a swaddle moment.
Yeah,
That's so calming for the nervous system. I was just doing reading some research all around deep pressure therapy and weighted blankets and swaddling and just how beneficial it is to the nervous system.
Yes. Oh my gosh. But that was my experience with it. I literally it's funny you asked. I got a question today from somebody that was like, what temperature was your cold plunge at? It's like, well, I looked at the rivers around us and I know they're pretty cool. And I was getting in the rivers. So I wanted to match that. And then I took it down from there. But yeah. Prior to pregnancy, you could find blocks of ice on the top of our deep freeze.
Totally. So if we, and which is amazing. And if we transition a little bit to the conversation around breath, and this is something that I don't have the answer to at all as a breathwork leader, even, which is my, Lamaze was like the big thing in my mom's day.
Totally.
And so I just wonder how the evolution of that, or just like how that wove itself into the landscape. And people aren't really doing Lamaze anymore.
No.
Are they?
I mean, it still exists.
Somewhere maybe, but
yeah. And God bless them because they were like one of the first birth education courses.
Totally.
And then came Bradley method and like things like hypnobirthing. I used to teach hypnobirthing back in the day. But now we have like such an array. Like you can go on Instagram and find any sort of birth prep that matches your values or preferences, and you'll get a great education. We have so many resources available now.
Amazing.
One of the things with breath, so at BirthFit, we teach 2 simple breaths, and this is mainly having to do with fitness. We teach the regular human diaphragm breath, how we were designed as humans to breathe. And we do have to review this because we have to reteach this and reset this in pregnancy and postpartum more so than anything. And for those of y'all listening, how we teach it is like, okay, we got the diaphragm and we got the pelvic floor and then our cylinder. This is the core. And our diaphragm and pelvic floor always work together. Like neither one works in isolation. And so when we inhale, everything naturally lowers and expands. We expand 360 degrees. Our rib cage moves out laterally. And then when we exhale, everything naturally returns back to neutral. And that's a regular old human breath. And if you watch babies, they're starting to do this as they lay on their backs and they're starting to like grab their feet for happy baby. They're starting to use the ground underneath them to stabilize. And this is their first lesson in managing their own internal pressure system. And the other thing I'll say here with the regular diaphragm breath is to signal to your nervous system that you are safe so it doesn't like create chaos in your body. It's got to go in through your nose. In through your nose, and it can be out through your nose or your mouth, but super simple. So that's what we teach. Okay, in through your nose. Expand. Okay. And if if we've been revved up or upregulated and we want to downregulate, then let's lengthen that exhale. Let's maybe add a noise to it. So if we breathe in and out, kind of looks like labor, feels like labor, early labor.
Later labor, when the F-bombs come out, it's a whole different story.
And those are like, that's a simple human breath that can be used and morphed into so many ways. If you're doing Wim Hof or anything like the fire breath in yoga, where it's like, it's a kind of a branch of that. You've got to still be able to do the regular diaphragm breath as a human, what you as an infant learned how to do. Yeah. So all of our movements, all of our BirthFit basics movements, everything, we go back to developmental kinesiology. The other breath we teach is the stability breath, or task-specific intra-abdominal pressure. And this is so we can transfer power, absorb load, move heavy objects. And it starts the same way that the regular old human breath starts, where we inhale, everything lowers and expands. But on the exhale, our pelvic floor and the surrounding muscles are active in the eccentric pelvic resistance that was created on that task-specific intra-abdominal pressure that we created. So those are the two things we teach. But it's simple, not easy, right? So like during pregnancy, our rib cage expands, our lumbar spine curve gets a little more exaggerated, and our diaphragm loses range of motion. So our breath begins to shorten. And
I'm like doing it as you're saying it.
Yeah.
Like,
that's just one thing we got to address on the like musculoskeletal side on postpartum, is restacking that rib cage on top of the pelvis so that the diaphragm and pelvic floor can be lined up.
And I imagine a lot of changes are happening in the pelvic floor, right? So this is when women will come to me after and talk about diastasis recti or working with other programs where they're really rebuilding their pelvic floor and they're getting reconnected to the musculature.
Yes. Yeah. So fun fact, it is said that women's pelvic floors can expand up to 25% or up to 250% of what their pelvic floor was. So the female body is freaking brilliant and a masterpiece. It's crazy to think about that. But the best start to rehabbing postpartum is with breath, because it's super gentle. And more times than not, women are prescribed Kegels. And that's like the last thing you want to do, because if you think about that, you're shortening the pelvic floor. And what happens in a shortened state is usually like trauma. We hold trauma, we clench, we kind of like, we're not in that expansion mode. But the first thing we want to do in pregnancy is relax the pelvic floor. Same thing postpartum. Okay, maybe some gentle Kegels just to say, hey, pelvic floor, you doing good? But it's not, we don't want to be doing them at all the stoplights or, 100 a day. We just breathing, simple diaphragm breathing is going to do wonders. The other thing I'll say is, with our breath, we can like shift energy, right? Like we felt it with different breathwork classes, or you could have like such a gnarly experience, like visualizations, seeing things, tingles in your body. What do you call it? Holotropic breathwork. Gosh, I've done some gnarly breathwork classes in LA.
Where you're just like writhing on the floor, you're dizzy, feeling like you're floating. I've done classes where I'm like,
all the drugs.
I feel like there's an electrical charge under this pillow I'm lying on.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Well, you can have that. So you can have that experience in birth. There's one thing I thought about the whole time. And it was just like, I'm focusing on this breath, this task at hand. All that's in front of me right now is my next breath. And I have the choice of how I want to use that. And you can get all riled up and be like, and run from the contraction almost. Like the contraction's not going to be bigger than you because it is you. So if you can put your feet on the ground, take in a breath and breathe baby down, almost like an ujjayi breath. You can close your mouth, send that energy, send that breath down, almost like a J, down and out. That's just going to, I want to say like hug baby, like hug baby all the way down. I think it's beautiful. The other thing, gosh, there's so many things on breath I could go off.
But what you're describing is also amazing. Is it's like when someone gets into an ice bath and they're fighting against the surrender. Yes. And I feel like there's a correlation here that's like, how do you like actually tap into where you are and not use fear, use love to go back to that and be like, how do I like breathe into that? Because it is just one next breath. It's no one said it wasn't going to be not a little painful, perhaps, or a little sensational. Let's just call it intense,
Intense
but we can
is
choose.
The best word.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's what's wild is you mentioned this is like, I used to practice that breath in the ice bath. It's like the ujjayi breath is like fogging the window or feeling like the back of your throat is velvet, like letting that just breathe down and out. If you want to get a little spiritual with it, there's a pastor on Instagram. I totally forget his name. I feel so bad, but he's got an awesome video. I'll try to find it and send it to you. And he talks about, the word Yahweh, meaning God. And if you take out the vowels, we literally say this on our first breath here on earth and our last breath here on earth. We're saying his name or Yahweh. So if you think about that, it's like,
Wow.
And it's like what I heard him say this for the first time, that gave me chills because you're in the birth portal. I'm in the birth portal and I'm thinking about one breath at a time. I'm like, God, be with me here.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know I was calling his name, but I was. And literally it's the first and last thing we say here on earth. It's wild. And the last thing about breath is it truly is the one thing that connects the physical and the non-physical, and it happens right here in the center of our body, like the diaphragm, if you want to be nerdy, major muscle of respiration, stability. But it's also, that's where the solar plexus is, like our third chakra. It's where like the out there chakras meet the more grounded chakras and our identity, So if we can kind of resonate in that space, and it's a big transition zone for us as chiropractors and body workers. It's the thoracolumbar space, like where the thoracics kind of go into the lumbar. The curve changes. It's a big transition change zone. So there's a lot going on there. Big transfer of power. But there's a great book, Eastern Body, Western Mind, that kind of breaks up the chakras. And
is Eastern Body, Western Mind the one where it breaks up the chakras and aligns them to some of the other like more medical things?
Yeah, I think so.
Because I feel like I read a couple of sections of it and they're like, hey, here's the chakra lineup. And here's also some like, when we take this research study and these meridian points and we put them all together, you can see that there's correlation here, even though it's like no one's really done that before, but they're taking the different factions and putting it together.
Do.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a
big read, I think, right? It's a relatively big book.
Thick. I was going to say that. It's like, pick out a chakra, pick out a chapter, do it one at a time.
Yeah. But, so amazing.
Yeah. The breath, like whenever I teach our coaches, you can go down rabbit holes with breath, but I want you to leave and be able to teach your client when they come postpartum rehab, you're teaching them diaphragm breath and stability breath. Then they can go and do any breathwork class they want. They can do the vacuum breath, the ujjayi breath, the fire breath, Kundalini breath, whatever, because it's all relevant and it's all useful. But we just have to know the basics. And that's what we do at BirthFit.
Yeah. And you want them to be able to go back to those safe spaces where they know that they're using one for, moving load, and one for really like this everyday breathing piece. Oh,
Yeah.
so much. We could talk for hours. There are a lot of resources that you have, not just paid resources, which absolutely, if there's anyone out in the world looking to be able to get themselves fit for birth and all of the components that go along with that, that's pre and also post, definitely looking up BirthFit. But I would love for you to just share where people can find you, connect, and also some of the resources that I know I'll be sharing with the mentee group in the breath and cold space.
Cool.
And Emily will be talking about when she comes in. So that people who are listening can start to get to know you and some of these tools.
Yeah. So awesome. Thanks for having me. Thanks for sharing the BirthFit love. And we have a ton of stuff on YouTube, like all the BirthFit basics movements, the 15 movements and poses that are based on developmental kinesiology, and that our programs are based, like we do the BirthFit basics like it's nobody's business. Those are all free on YouTube. So I always tell people, if you don't want to train with us, you don't want to do anything with us, go do those for free. Like, you need a solid foundation.
Mm-hmm.
All of our podcast recordings are live, or the live ones are on YouTube. We have podcasts that's been in existence, got way too long. And right now I'm just doing one episode a month because that's all I can do. And like we were talking about, Dr. Tom's on there, but we also have awesome resources like Diane Lee, who talks all about DRA. And she's a brilliant Canadian physiotherapist that studied DRA for 40 years, way smarter than me. And it might surprise you what she shares. And that whole landscape about DRA is going to change, I think, in the next, hopefully 2 years, but 5 years for sure. Depth matters more than width, and functionality matters more. So give that a listen. She's a wizard. And then we also have women on there like Yolanda Norris Clark, who's like the queen of free birth, unassisted birth. She gives a brilliant interview, and she's had 10 babies. So she's had all of them at home with no assistance. It's wild.
So she knows.
She knows a thing or two. So check that out. And we really try to nurture our community on Instagram. And we have an app now, which comes with all of our programs. And so it's really awesome in our chat section in the app. I think it's our community is super valuable, and we try to take really good care of them when they're in there, and answer any questions, like consults, anything like that, case studies. We have a monthly support session for anybody in our programs, and we generally, we can pick apart your case if you're having trouble. So I'm biased, but I love BirthFit, and and
I love it too. I feel like the world's number one resource for women to know.
Well, thank you. And now that I've gone through the whole experience and done all of our programs, start to finish, I can honestly say without a doubt, I'm super proud of the work we do, and it's really cool. And we have coaches everywhere. We got 100 in our coach cohort right now. So just look for a BirthFit local resource, because I guarantee they'll support you and help you as best they can.
Yeah, I love that. So wonderful. All right. Well, everyone's going to be looking you up. Thanks so much for spending this time sharing your knowledge with me in the audience, and taking time away from the baby just momentarily, just for a little hour. Yeah. And we'll talk soon and share more soon.
Awesome. Thank you for the work you do.